Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, the creator and host of the award-winning podcast that you're listening to right now. Thank you so much, called Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. It is a daily podcast, 365 days a year, and each day we talk to an author about all of the things related to their career, their book, their life, and more in 30 minutes or less, because who has time? I am now an author myself, although I wasn't when I started this podcast, and you can get my new memoir, Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature, wherever books are sold starting July 1st, and my children's book, Princess Charming. You can learn more about me at zibbyowens.com, but really you're here to learn more about the authors, and that is what we're going to do. Also, be sure to check out all the other podcasts in the Zcast Podcast Network. You can learn more at zcastnetwork.com and definitely check out those shows as well. Angie Cruz is the author of How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water, a novel. Angie is a novelist and editor. Her novel Dominicana was the inaugural book pick for GMA Book Club and shortlisted for the Women's Prize, longlisted for the Andrew Carnegie Medals for Excellence in Fiction, the Aspen Words Literary Prize, a RUSA Notable Book, and the winner of the ALA YALSA Alex Award in Fiction. It was named Most Anticipated Best Book in 2019 by Time, Newsweek, People, Oprah Magazine, The Washington Post, The New York Times, and Esquire. She is the author of two other novels, Soledad and Let It Rain Coffee, and the recipient of numerous fellowships and residencies, including the Lighthouse Fellowship, Siena Art Institute, and the CUNY Dominican Studies Institute Fellowship. She has published shorter works in the Paris Review, VQR, Callaloo, Gulf Coast, and other journals. And she's the founder and editor-in-chief of the award-winning literary journal Asterix, and is currently an associate professor at University of Pittsburgh. She divides her time between Pittsburgh, New York, and Turin. Welcome, Angie. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. So your latest novel, your fourth novel, is How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water. Can you please tell listeners what it's about and what inspired you to write it?
So the novel, How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water, is about Cara Romero, who is 56 and has lost her job and unemployed from a job she had in a factory over 25 years. And she's now has to look for work. And the novel basically is 12-week sessions of her meeting with a job counselor called the Senior Workforce Program. And in the process of meeting this job counselor for 30 minutes each week, she tells the story of her life.
It's amazing. I'm such a sucker for a good structure. And I feel like this is amazing. I used to have I do the Zibby Awards, and I used to have a Zibby Awards for like the best structure, because I think it's so underrated, right? It's so, anyway, So I love how you divided it into 12 like that. Why now this story? And by the way, I love the playlist on Spotify. We'll be listening to it the rest of the day. So thank you for that.
So why now? I mean, I think that when you enter a book, you're not thinking the now. I mean, it takes so long to write a book, right? So when I started the book in 2017, it was a moment in my life where I wasn't sure if I was going to continue writing. I had been going through numerous rejections from my last book, Dominicana, 4 years of rejections.
Really?
Being told that there wasn't a market for the book, that the book was too quiet. And I was thinking, my God, I still have time to start a new career if I wanted to. And, the Trump presidency really had me worried about what was going on in the country. And I was realizing, what could I do with my gifts? And what would it look like to start over? And one day on a platform, I was standing there in Washington Heights and 168th Street. And I saw this woman reading some kind of handbook. And she seemed to be like in her late 50s, early 60s. And I started thinking a lot about the women in my family who lost their jobs during the Great Recession. There were a lot of them. In fact, one of the largest demographic of long-term unemployed people are working class Latinx and Black women in New York City. Recession, and in 2006 to 2009. And I said, wow, what must it be like to start over as someone who might not speak the language or who has been in a job for so many years, and the workforce has changed because of technology. And I just said, I don't know. I was like, it would be funny to see them in an interview. What would they say? And that day I just downloaded all these interview questions from online, the most popular ones, like, what is your weakness? What are your strengths? What do you dream? And Cara Romero came to me and she said, Cara Romero, my name is Cara Romero. I came to this country because my husband wanted to kill me. Don't look so shocked. You're the one who asked me to tell you about myself. Tell me, and then I was riveted by this character and I just kept listening to her for the next year.
And it just came to you like that, right at your fingertips.
Yeah, maybe she was always in me. And, in the process of working on my novel, Dominicana, I did many, many interviews with women who came to the United States in the 60s and 70s. And I heard a lot about their arrival story and the kinds of things they went through at work. I heard many laid off stories and how that forced them into early retirement and how difficult that was to sustain, how they had to figure out ways to sustain themselves, even though they weren't long-term employed. And I guess I was planting seeds, all those years I was working on the book for Cara Romero. So when she came to me, it was like a way, she was like, I am going to be the voice of my people.
Do you have a visual? Do you know exactly what she looks like in your head?
I don't. I hear her. I can't see her. I mean, she looks like many women, right? The translator who's going to be translating to Spanish, Kiani Antigua, who translated also Dominicana into Spanish, she said, we are all Cara Romero. And I actually, I started my book tour and I feel kind of strangely, a lot of people identify with Cara Romero or as the interviewer, right? These two people represent a big section of our world. In fact, I had a man who said to me, oh my God, when I hear Cara Romero, I hear myself. And some of the things I told my kids, and I said, oh, this is amazing that somehow this woman is speaking, I guess because she's so candid and we're so afraid now to be candid because there's so little forgiveness for misspeaks and mistakes. And I think that somehow I sort of giving people permission or kind of affirmation for the ways that we could be messy or wrong or trying to figure things out in how we're trying to understand racism, homophobia, classism, all these things and so, yeah, it's been really interesting to see the response.
Wow. Wait, could we go back to the fact that you were about to give up writing and you had 4 years of rejections? That's crazy. Why, first of all, were you expecting when you finished, were you like, this is great, this is going to sell? And then you just kept getting rejected. And show me the moment when you were at your most depressed about that experience.
I think it was that day that I started working on Cara Romero. It was November 2017. I remember it very vividly. Trump had just announced a Muslim ban. There was a call on Twitter for immigrant lawyers to go to JFK. We were seeing tons and tons and tons of footage of kids in cages and, on the border, and receiving emails from, my agent basically with letters from editors saying, oh, the writing is beautiful, but we don't know how to sell this book, or we don't know, is there a market? And then smaller presses were it's not innovative enough. It's not edgy enough. Right. And I said, wow, where do I fit in this conversation? And maybe I don't fit, right? In this conversation. And I guess I did feel despair. I felt despair because I was wow, this is something I love to do. And yet I have to figure out how I'm going to survive. Right. I'm not so old that I can't start over and find a real way to build my retirement account and all this stuff. But I'm not so young that I could waste time, right? Or lose time waiting to see if, and also I was up for tenure. I wasn't going to get tenure if I didn't get into contract. I mean, there were a lot of pressures. And yeah, so I felt despair for my country. I felt despair for my own career. And Cara Romero emerged. And, I have a very dear friend, Jennifer Clement, who's a wonderful writer. She wrote the book on Prayers for the Stolen. And she said to me, writers write. It doesn't matter if anyone's going to read the work, you're going to write. And I do believe storytelling saved my life, in many different ways, reading stories, listening to stories. So it's not a surprise that in a moment of deep despair, Cara Romero came to me so urgently and with so much to say.
I love that. Tell me about one of the stories or the books that got you through a really difficult time.
You mean books that I'm reading?
Yeah. Or you said stories have been so important to you. So what was a story that took you from one part of your life to another? Not that you wrote, but that you, and why did you need it so much? And what did it do for you?
As a younger writer, I think reading a lot of the African-American writers like James Baldwin and Toni Morrison and slave narratives in general were really useful in me to understand where my place was in the United States and how I'm part of this Black diaspora. And that was really important for me. as someone who always felt like an outsider in the United States, even though I was born and raised here. But, during the pandemic, there were some books that really surprised me and really kept me company. Like Vivian Gornick has this book called Odd Woman in the City. It's so great. And, and I was in New York City during the pandemic, and the city was kind of like, what we were missing was connection. And that book is so much about connection and, people meeting up and hanging out. And in some ways, like having someone write about that experience reminded me like, oh yeah, this is what makes the city so beautiful. Everyone was leaving and moving to a place with a backyard. And I was like, yeah, but there's something really great about having neighbors and be all piled up on top of each other too. So I would say that book was really wonderful. And I carried it around, actually. It was like one of the books that I carried around with me. Like I was like, she's with me and we're having this conversation about New York.
A talisman.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get into writing to begin with? Like, tell me about the first novel experience. How was that journey versus this one?
I have a very, I think, non-traditional path to writing. Maybe everyone does, but definitely I didn't imagine myself as a writer. As a young person, I only read Dead White Men and I didn't imagine that I was ever going to find myself in a book or tell a story inside of a book. And then, I went to the university and I started reading, African-American literature, Chicano literature, which is what was available at the time, and some Caribbean literature like Jamaica Kincaid and I was like, oh, okay, maybe there is a place for Dominican story. But I wasn't convinced that I could do it. But I had like these amazing teachers and they encouraged me to go to these like writing residencies and fellowships. And it was like slow, but I think I became a writer because there were so many different people who would read a little something that I would write, but when I applied to my MFA, I only had 20 pages of a novel. That's all I've ever written. Like, that's it. Right. So, and I went to NYU, but those pages did a lot of work for me because anytime someone would read it, they were like, oh, you really could do this thing. Maybe you should try for this. And yeah, so I ended up going an MFA in that way. Someone was like, you really could do this thing. You should apply an MFA. And I decided to go. And my first teacher was a Dewey Dandicott, and it was her first class she ever taught. So we like kind of came up together in a strange way. And I guess I feel like it's funny because I think I was saying this yesterday. I had a launch event at my community bookstore. It's called Word Up Community Bookstore. And I was saying that, the myth of the writer when I was a younger writer was that you're alone in your room and you're typing away and maybe you're in the woods and no one's talking to you. And, and I didn't grow up that way. I grew up in a crowded space where the door was always open and the kitchen was always working. And I like being alone, like, yes, I could do it. I could be alone. I go to residencies. It's really useful. But I do feel like so much of my writing practice, the reason that I've gotten this far, in particular with this book, is because I had community in those moments of despair. I had great friends, like one of the wonderful best writers of our generation, Emily Roboto, who was my neighbor at the time. She goes, you're a great writer. All you need is one editor to believe in. Other people, I would probably have given up. Like, I don't think I had it all inside of me. I think it was really that I had people that really believed in the work and the story.
That's wonderful. Amazing. Did you actually talk to career counselors for this book?
Yeah, I actually did all the forms as Cara Romero. I went through a lot of processes and bureaucracy.
Oh,
as far as I could
my
go.
gosh.
Yeah. You can't go very far without a social security number, but like I did do a lot of the career counseling exams and I kept thinking about like, how far can you go, and thinking about like how difficult it is, the bureaucratic elements of our lives. I mean, I grew up as a translator for a lot of my family members moving through these systems. So I have a lot of familiarity with documents and have seen how difficult some of these questions, especially the security questions, like they're ridiculously culturally biased, right? And it was so fun to play with them, and like give it a satirical, like, slant in a literary work after all these years where you're just kind of performing a thing, and actually having a character just be honest with the thing. And then of course it critiques the thing, right? The thing that I'm actually doing is critiquing how a lot of these machines keep us out or allow us in.
Interesting. Oh my gosh. What do you like to do when you're not writing? When you're not working? When you have like, if you had a free day, what would a dream day be?
Honestly, I do a lot of not writing. I'm like, oh, what my life is like in general. I read, I walk, I meet friends for lunch. For different books, I did different kinds of things I always like to balance, like with this particular book, because I wrote it so much in pandemic, I got into elaborate cooking, like a lot of other people. I have a 14-year-old, so I entertain like some of his interests, whatever they are. But yeah, it's funny because I was thinking, like, do I have a hobby right now? I don't have a hobby right now, but I used to draw a lot and paint a lot. And I'm thinking of returning to that. I'm a teacher, so I mentor a lot of students. I spend a lot of time talking to young writers about their work. I am on the board of my local bookstore and I brainstorm with them about how to keep them alive and going. Yeah, so that's pretty much my life outside of traveling all the time.
What are the secrets to thrive? Like, what are you helping with the bookstore? It seems like what are yeah, no, not impossible, but I just feel like odds are stacked up against so many pieces and players in the whole literary ecosystem right now. As people, but maybe
this is true. I do think that's true. This particular bookstore is like 60 volunteer is run by 16 volunteers and very few paid employees. And I think that it's done a really good job of sustaining themselves throughout the pandemic. But in particular in Washington Heights being like the only bookstore in this neighborhood, what's been really interesting, and this is how I got involved, is seeing how it flexed a kind of fluidity for the demands of the neighborhood. So there was a moment where they were giving away, like they have a food relief program during the pandemic, and they became a COVID testing type, and they combined that with book and literature, right? So suddenly like they're testing people and people are getting free books. Like my book, Dominicana, was one of the books that they were getting for free when they went to get tested for COVID, or food relief boxes would have a book inside of it, right? So, and I think that's really interesting to think about. How do we get books to new audiences, right? It was really fun. But I do think that encouraging, part of the secret is really like telling people that these resources are there. So like a lot of people don't know that there's a bookstore in the community. They'll just shop on Amazon and they don't know that they could just order online from the local bookstore all over the country. There's a bookstore near you that you can order online and you could support and sustain. And I think most people don't know that.
Or I think they value the speed at which they could do something else. Right? That takes a couple extra steps. So,
that's true.
I know it seems ridiculous, but I think that's the rationale. I think people are like, well, do I go online? They don't have my stuff stored. What's my password?
Totally. And that is true. And I find that frustrating too. And, but I do think that one of the things I've been learning with time, and I think this really was true in the pandemic, is the value of when things weren't working so well, right? Like of having local businesses that were actually open and providing stuff for you. And the truth is you could order a book and pick it up. And that means you have to walk a few blocks, and it's so good for you. You don't have to get it shipped. They could get into their store immediately. You could just walk over, you call for it. And walking and taking that walk is actually really good for you. So the benefits outweigh any kind of like this culture for speed, which is one of the reasons I think my book also is doing something really interesting with time, which I hadn't thought about before. But now that it's out, I realize that what it's done is it forces people to sit down and listen to a person for 5 hours, right? Tell their story and all its nuances. And we're so rushed that rarely do we give anyone the amount of time necessary to unpack what they're thinking, what they're feeling. And there's so much value in the desahogo. The book has this word that I use. It's called desahogar, which is the undrowning, which you could cry it out or you could talk it out. And sometimes that takes days and weeks. And when we think about things that happen to us, like loss, the ways we grieve, it's almost like we have to do it so quickly and move on. But what this book forces you to do is not to move on. It's really just to stay with it and really think and laugh. There's a lot of humor in the book, as you know.
Yeah.
And the humor is, it also connected to the ways that we can cope, but also how even in the challenging moments, there's joy. So we laugh not to cry.
Yeah.
you know?
So true. I knew there was like something really wrong with the world when I was in some sort, not even a hardware store, some place that had all these random things, but my husband needed like a wrench or something like that, or some item, houseware type. Anyway, he had it in his hand, and then he took his phone out in the other hand, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Well, I'm ordering this on Amazon to be shipped." And I was like, "It's literally in your hand. You're holding the object. Why are you going to order it?" And he's like, "Well, how am I going to carry it? I don't really want it. We were on a trip or something." And I was just like, this is so crazy. I was like, all the steps now that are going to happen to get this hammer or whatever from the factory into the box into the car, out of the car. How many hands are going to touch this box, and logistics involved to get it so that we open our door and there it is. It just seems like beyond inefficient. It seems efficient for the end user, but actually it's completely inefficient.
It's totally inefficient. And especially because we're not thinking that we're connected to every aspect of this, right?
Yes. No, we don't think about it.
World as if we're not connected, but everything we do has an impact, an environmental impact, a climate impact, a physical impact. And, again, like this book is so much about community, right? So how she moves to the community, she goes to the everything store, and the everything store. In fact, there is an everything store in a lot of communities, right? But you wouldn't discover it if you're always ordering at Home Depot, you know what I mean? And getting it shipped. But there is and you have people that are informed and have been doing this for a long time and give you free advice about things. And you don't even realize all these resources that exist everywhere you go, right? And it's true. Like it seems efficient, but actually it's incredibly inefficient. And sometimes things get lost and then they don't even arrive. And then you have to spend more time trying to resolve that problem. But again, this is about narratives that we tell ourselves.
Yes.
Of what's fast, what's easy.
And what we value.
Not necessarily fast or easy, but even more, it's like the emptiness of it.
Yes.
Because we're not connecting. We're not connecting. We're not connecting to nature. We're not connecting to people.
So true. Yeah. In addition to the walking to the bookstore, which is another ancillary benefit, it's also chatting with the people and seeing what other people are reading and walking in and meeting somebody. And then who do you bump into on the street? And like anytime I walk out my door, something happens, right? I meet somebody, but if you're just here, like slicing open Amazon packages all day, what's going to happen to you? So anyway, I know this is off topic, but I think about this a lot, actually, especially in terms of bookstores. And somebody once joked, who I was chatting with about it, they're like, maybe it was somebody who worked in a bookstore, just like, really? You need this like by the end of the day? You're really going to start reading this particular book? You can't wait to start this book. It's going to sit on your bedside for months. So why do you need it tomorrow by 9 p.m.? Couldn't you wait a week? Could you not read something else? So I don't know. I feel like maybe there needs to be a campaign for bookstores as a whole that it's just says like, really? You like, when are you gonna read this? Or something that encourages people to go back into the stores and rethink how they've made all these decisions. I don't know. Maybe you could start it.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to start a business. I love writing so much, but
not even a business.
And I'm so glad I could still do it, even though I thought I would give up. But, it's like your podcast. It talks a campaign.
Yeah. A campaign.
Your podcast is called Moms Don't Have Time to Read, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was thinking about it because I'm a mom, and I was thinking about how reading has changed for me since I became a mother. And I think that it changes the way you write a book too, right? So the reason I wrote this book in 12 sessions, I also think it's because the way I consume books now are in 30-minute sessions, right? It's when I'm commuting. It's when I actually have a little downtime before sleep. And in some ways I was like, yeah, this book is perfect for moms who don't have time to read.
It's true.
It's all in these tiny, like these small sessions that you actually could read one and then read another. And in 12 weeks, it'll be done because that's how long the book is. 12 days. Yeah. Yeah. If you do it every day. Mm-hmm.
That's perfect. Yes, you're absolutely right. And also people like to feel accomplished.
Yeah.
Right. That they could do a whole thing, like a whole chapter, a whole section. And they feel good about themselves. And then they want to read it again. Mm-hmm. So there you go. What's your next project?
I have a lot of projects I'm working on right now. One is about a young street photographer, and another one is set in Italy. So it's hard for me to figure out like it's funny because I was thinking I was working more on the street photographer project, but now that Cara Romero, I'm talking so much about Cara Romero, I might start working on the Italian project because it's dealing with immigrants and labor as well. But again, like right now I'm on tour and I really want to be present on tour. I'm not trying to be the writer and also the author, right? Yeah. Being the author requires a lot of energy. And being the writer requires a different kind of energy. And one thing I've learned the hard way is that I could really just do one thing at a time. Well, I could do a lot. I'm a great, I think women have been made to think that we're great multitaskers, like moms especially, right? And that we could do it all. But I think that myth is, or we should rephrase it and say, we can't do it all well. Somebody pays. Our child pays, our partner pays, our jobs pay, like our writing pays.
Our bodies.
And I'm really trying to be present for this book after I work so hard on it, as much as possible.
Go do that. That's amazing. Yeah. Forget the other projects. We'll see what happens.
I mean, they live there, right? Yeah. Now I'm like, oh yeah, all that stuff I was doing in 2015, I see it come through the book now, right? Like, so living life is also writing, right?
Yep. It's an important ingredient. You need the ingredients before you can make the cake.
Mm-hmm.
That was my genius statement of the day. So there you go. Anyway, Angie, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for all of your work, and honestly, the role model of resilience is just unparalleled. So it's amazing.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Have a great day.
Okay. You too.
Okay. Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.